Okay, I'm back with part two. I found the distributed practice section, so that way it won't be such a surprise when you take it on the test. So the first question, it wants you to find the inverse. Remember that the inverse requires you to have an x and a y, so I'm just going to go ahead and change this to a y. The first step of finding the inverse after you have your x and your y is to switch your x and your y. So I'm going to put the x right here, I'm going to put the y over here, and then I'm going to take every symbol and put it back where it was. So it's going to look like this, and then plus 5. Then what we have to do is we have to try to get y by itself. Before we mess with this radical, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the stuff outside of it. So I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. So this is x minus 5, and then we're equal to cube root of y minus 1. Now I want that y by itself, but I can't touch it because it's inside of the radical. So to get it out of the radical, we use parentheses to the third power. Since the index is 3, use that as the exponent and it'll cancel them. And you have to remember to do that to both sides though, so it's fair. So you'll have x minus 5 to the third power equals, these guys cross each other out. So now we're just left with y minus 1. So the final step is to just add 1 to get that y all alone. So our final answer is going to say f inverse of x equals the parentheses x minus 5 to the third power plus 1. And then that's our final answer. Next question says, given f of x and g of x, find f of g of 2. So when you have a number inside these parentheses, you have to start with the letter that's closest to it. So I'm going to find g of negative 2 first. G of negative 2 means plug in negative 2 into the g problem. So I'm going to have 1/4 parentheses negative 2 minus 3. And at that point, it's just a calculator question. So let me open up the calculator real quick. Let's close out of this because I don't want to see that nonsense. And then we'll shrink it down just a little bit. And let me adjust my settings so I can see the execute button. So I'm going to put in 1/4, go down to the bottom, parentheses, negative 2, close the parentheses, minus 3. And it tells me that the answer is negative 7/2. Now we're not done yet because this is a two-step problem. So now that we found the answer to this stuff, we have to plug that answer into the f problem. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the f problem, and I'm going to plug in negative 7/2. So I'm going to have negative 2 parentheses negative 7/2 squared plus 5 times negative 7/2, and that's it. So now I can go back into my calculator and type that stuff in. So negative 2 parentheses fraction negative 7 on top and 2 on the bottom. Go to the side, close those parentheses and square it, and then plus 5 parentheses negative 7/2. And I want to talk about this real quick. You see how that negative 7, the negative is on the 7, the negative is in the front? It's the same thing. It doesn't matter where you put the negative. As long as there's only one negative, it doesn't matter if it's on the top, on the bottom, or in the front. They both mean the same thing. So our final answer here is just negative 42. So although this is a two-step equation, the final answer is that final step. Okay, next, we got to factor this. So we have like 6 different factoring strategies. So the first one we should always check is if there's a GCF, and this one clearly does not have a GCF. We know that this is not an ABC question because there's only 2 terms. So it either has to be a squares or a cubes. A cubes question is going to have an exponent of 3. So this is going to be a cubes question. So you're going to have to remember the format for a cubes question. The format is A, B in the first parentheses. And then in my second parentheses, it's going to be A times A times B, and then B times B. Then we use the acronym SOAP for the signs. So it's S-O-A-P. The acronym means the same sign, the opposite sign, and then always positive. So if we could just come up with this first parentheses, we can build the rest of our answer. So we're going to do that by taking the cube root. So we take the cube root of each one. That's going to give me x for my first parentheses. This one's going to give me 10 for my second parentheses. And now I can go ahead and fill in the three values that go in the second parentheses. So it's going to be, for this spot, it's going to be a times a. So a is the x. So x times x is x squared. The middle spot is a times b. So this is going to be x times 10. So that's 10x. And then the final spot is just b times b. So that's going to be 10 times 10, which is 100. Notice I didn't mess with the signs because signs are irrelevant until the end. Now we use the SOAP acronym to fill in the signs. So it's going to be the same as the original, opposite, and then always positive. So there's our answer. The final question asks us to find a domain. Now here's the thing about domains. Domains are usually going to be all real numbers except two things. If you see a fraction, or if you see a square root. If you see a fraction, you set the bottom equal to 0, solve it, and then say that the domain is everything except that number. If you see a radical, you're going to set the inside bigger than or equal to 0, because we can only have positive values inside of this square root. Now, we don't have any of those cases happening here, so the domain for this one is just going to be all real numbers, which we know to write as negative infinity to infinity. And that's our answer. And that concludes the review, so hopefully that'll help you do a little bit better on this next test.